Okay. My name is Lake Enola, and it is October 4th, 2018. I am conducting this interview at the Indiana Historical Society. I am a student at IUP, and I'm conducting this interview for a project that is a collaboration between the IUP Oral History Program and the Historical and Genealogical Society of Indiana County. We are collecting and analyzing interviews with longtime area residents about the community of Indiana. This collection is meant to complement work recently completed on the histories of some of the older buildings still standing in the town of Indiana. Our goal is to learn more about the community through the people's experiences and memories. So, would you please begin by stating your name, maiden name, and then spelling them?
I am Joanne McQuilkiin. I was born in Avonmore, Pennsylvania, but have known Indiana all my life. We came up here for various reasons through the years. Right now, I am finishing a 2-year term as the president for the Historical and Genealogical Society. And so then I'll be passing our rubber chicken on to the next president. We give that instead of a gavel. No, go ahead.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm just going to start with some basic questions and we'll lead into more big theme ones.
Okay.
So you already said it, but just for the record again, where were you born or grew up and in what year?
1930 in Avonmore, Pennsylvania at home.
Oh, very interesting.
Yes.
Did your family always grow up there?
They were there. The ancestors were out on a farm at Maysville, fought in the Civil War from there, and so on and so forth. And then my grandfather, Couch, went out to the Civil War 2 different times from the farm. Then after the war, he moved to Missouri. My father and he had, there were 8 in the family, and my dad, after graduating from high school, attended a business school in Warrensburg, Missouri, and came east to Maysville, where a bachelor uncle and 2 aunts, who unmarried aunts, lived, and he started working in the bank in Avonmore at that time with a horse and buggy. And one of the interesting things that I think is historical, they signed bills, the actual money, by hand. And I have some at home. And then after a while, into the early 20s, they were stamping them. And then after that, that was stopped. And the small banks did not sign their money after that. Mm-hmm. And I have a picture of my dad sitting behind stacks of gold with the man who was president of the bank at that time, and they would put that in the safe every morning. So I think that's sort of an historical event that needs recorded.
Do you know what time he worked there? Like
from
years?
1905 to 1985.
It's a long time.
Yes, he was.
Okay, so talking about your ancestors, do you know where they immigrated from?
From Scotland, my mother's side, but they didn't come until about 1830, so they were not in the Revolution. My father's people, Nathan Couch, fought for George Washington and was given land down around what is Pittsburgh now. At that time, it was considered Virginia. And there is a Fort Couch, a road still named down there, and it's where the start of the Whiskey Rebellion was, at Bethel Park. And I am in the DAR because of this Nathan Couch. I just found out his father's name and mother's name, but I still don't know where in England they came from. I am working on that yet. Mm-hmm. And so part of the family moved here to Indiana County. And the oldest son of Nathan Couch, I believe his name was John, married the Manners girl next door. And the name of the was titled Noor, and that is still down there, and you can still see a building and a museum and things at that place. Anyway, they came towards out here then around Maysville, and settled on a couple of farms. And so then the family, the lady who found my genealogy claims that all the people named Couch are all related somewhere along the line. It's not that big a family, I don't believe. So I don't really know about that. But,
All right.
but there was just my sister and I, and so there were no boys to carry on the name.
So just one sister. What was your sister's name?
Marjorie, she Marjory. She was named after two old Scottish aunts, Marjorie Isabel. And I think I like the spelling of her name because you don't see it written that way very often.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, so.
And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Thomas Samuel Couch, and Mary Alice Fickus Couch, Fickes. Her mother, I have pictures of my grandmother and grandfather McBain, are the ones who, my grandmother's parents who came from Scotland. And they settled in Ohio, and then of course eventually she ended up in Avonmore with my grandfather. Yeah, so.
Yeah, you have a great grasp on your
Yes,
history.
oh yes.
Okay, so what were some of your interests as a child?
Oh, I loved to climb trees, and we rode bikes and roller skated on the sidewalks and read. And my mother taught us how to play the piano before we ever even started school, so I did a lot of music. And violin and singing and piano, and started in music at Indiana, but I decided after I was here for a year that I would go into elementary, and I did not stay, but I've always loved music, of course, and still played the piano up until recently. And I just moved from my house and I sold my piano, so I'm in a smaller place and I don't have it anymore. But always there's that interest, of course. And
so what did your parents do for work?
my father worked in the bank from the time he was a young man until he retired in 1969, and he passed away then a few months after he retired. And mother had started at Allegheny College, but her brother was killed in World War I, and I don't know why, but they made her come home. But after she married my father then, and but she was always interested in education, and she taught Latin as a substitute teacher a couple of days a week during the war in the 40s. And she tutored some other people in Latin for people, and she played the piano and the organ at our church, Presbyterian Church in Avonmore. But she belonged to a book club. I mean, we were all read. We had no library in town, so we would go down to Vandergrift and come home with stacks of books for everybody in the family read, so that was wonderful. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with my grandparents in the home, and that was a wonderful thing, too. And
were they your maternal or paternal?
It was my maternal mother, Cora Blanche Fickus, McBain Fickus, and Anderson Walker Fickus. And he and his brothers and brothers-in-law lived in Wheeling, and they were one of the, as from what I understand, they were early makers learning how to make Coke. And then the brothers-in-laws ended up being superintendent of works at Aliquippa, and they moved out of Avonmore and went on, but my grandfather stayed in Avonmore and worked at the foundry. He had a grocery store, and then after his son died in World War I, he worked some at the foundry. Mm-hmm. He was a watchman or something in his older years, you know. So that's what we did.
Sounds good. Okay, so do you know where your parents attended school at all?
My mother attended 3 years, I believe, They only had a 3-year high school, I think. I have that straight. I know my aunt only went 3 years to the Avonmore High School. They had a high school right there. And my dad, of course, was in Missouri, I believe in Warrensburg, but I'm not sure about. He grew up in Knob Noster, Missouri, on a farm. Isn't that a riot? Knob Noster. And there are a lot of relatives buried at the Warrensburg Cemetery, but I'm not sure about my dad's high school years. But I know he attended the Warrensburg business of the college there, I guess.
So to your knowledge, they both graduated high school?
Oh, yes, they both were high school graduates, definitely. And they both attended college, but I don't know, as my dad, he was 14 years older than mother, and they were very secretive about their age. A lot of things weren't talked about until I find them out later. So I'm a little vague about my dad's schooling. But as far as we can figure out, he came out here when he was about 20 in 1905. So he was born in 1884. I think I've got that. Did that sound right? I think I counted it up once, yeah.
Okay.
So.
Do you know when your mother was born at all?
Yes, she was born in 1898. They were married in 1918, and her dark blue silk trousseau dress is now here in the Historical Museum.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so they had it on display last year. So it's joined all the lovely clothing that we have here at the museum.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about your childhood. So you lived outside of town, obviously, and you said that you mentioned that you visited Indiana growing up?
Yes, we lived right in the town of Avonmore, up on Allegheny Avenue in a big old brick house. And behind us, we had an orchard, and there was a chicken coop, and there were no other houses behind. And we had a wonderful childhood. And it was just great. And we had my next door neighbor, of course. We and the kids would get out at night and play kick the can in the summer, and we played tennis in the middle of the road, and badminton, and bicycled all over, and went ice skating once in a while down on a pond in the wintertime, and sled riding, of course, because we lived up on a hill. And so just the wonderful old-fashioned things that we did. We only were a block from the school, so I did not have far to go, you know.
Yeah.
And I got to go from, we were in a yellow brick building, same children from, we had no kindergarten, from first grade to 8th was in one building, and then they had built a red brick high school building, and then you moved up to 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And during the war, World War II, then all of our teachers were, almost all except for the principal, were substitute teachers because of the war. But we still got a good education. They were strong. We had strong music teachers and strong English teachers, and the principal taught the government and POD history classes. And we had a Free Methodist minister that taught us biology. We still had good teachers. And when I went to Indiana, I didn't even have to take an entrance exam. And we only had 28 in our high school class, but we ended up with a couple of doctors and from the class, and pharmacists, and you know, they went on to do good things. And one of my classmates has been the mayor of Avonmore forever, and now he's finished. But we are all 88. We got together recently for Avonmore Days. And so Vanessa Gavati Speranza met us with Beta Sherrick, Ludwig Sherrick, Louis Sherrick, however you want to say. So we still get together for lunch sometimes. I drive down, and we still get together, you know. And
Okay, so whenever you did visit Indiana as a child, what were some of the things you remember?
Well, one of the things I remember vividly, we thought Indiana was so pretty because at that time it was just covered with trees. And the streets were pretty and it was fun to drive around. Now, Mother, when we were small, well, of course that went on too, even in college days, Mother loved going to the grocery store, the Atlantic Pacific, was where Giant Eagle, the old one, was. And then, of course, that's changed, and Giant Eagle's out of town now, and no A&P anymore. But some of the grocery stores, there was a Kroger's, a Streamline, a Foodland. They're not all at the same time. And, of course, now there's Bi-Lo, and there's Giant Eagle and Martin's. Those are later ones that came in. But we didn't have, I don't think, more than maybe 3 or so, at least that I remember of. There was one up street when I was in college. I think it was an Acme or a Kroger's that was up street for a while. But you would see people in town when you lived here. Then when I moved here as an adult, or when I came to college, you would see people you knew. Now they're strangers everywhere, and there's so many grocery stores and so many stores, so many food places to eat. We didn't have that, of course. We had no McDonald's. There was a Winkies at one time, and there was an outdoor inn, outside inn, I believe they called it, that you could go and eat once in a while. Of course, there was Bruno's and Recupero's, and some of those restaurants were old. Rustic Lodge outside town. I remember vividly that because it was fun to see that. And they had a lot of grass in the back. And we also passed the orphanage when we come to town. And we would go deliberately by that so we could see the children outside playing. And my cousin always said that those were his brothers and sisters. And of course they weren't. But that was vivid to me. Of course, I knew no orphans. And so this was quite something that I remember vividly at the old Indiana County, I believe it was, Indian Haven, where Indian Haven is now, I believe.
No, that's interesting. I never knew that there was an orphanage.
Yes, and my sister-in-law had friends that are friends to this day that grew up in the orphanage. Oh, yes. And Mrs. Merrill ran it, and I'm not sure when that quit, but they were those, I suppose it was done with by the 70s possibly, maybe before that, I'm not sure. But it served its purpose and it seemed to be needed, and they were well behaved. They went to the schools, they graduated from Indiana, and some of the people still live here that grew up there. And so that was an important part of Indiana.
Okay, so as I'm studying to be a historian, I read a lot of different perspectives on things like the Great Depression and World War II.
Yes.
So what was it like growing up before World War II, if you can remember?
Definitely. Everybody watched. You did not waste water. It always amused me when later they would come out and tell you not to run the water while you're brushing your teeth and to teach children, to be conservative. Well, we were taught that from the time we were little, and you were taught not to waste electric. You just didn't leave lights on if you were not using them. And I remember vividly the awful, you couldn't get butter. And they gave us this awful white mess in a plastic bag and this awful orange liquid in another bag. And I'd watch my grandmother put those together, and that made oleo. And it was gross. But we learned to eat it, and you had it, and you had to watch sugar. You did not waste your sugar. You had to watch gas rationing. You had to be careful. Of course, my dad... They did not he did not drive the car to work. He walked to work every day. It was just a couple blocks down, or 3 blocks maybe. But you did not just run your car anywhere. You used it if you needed to go out of town. Or we went mostly towards Tarentum and Natrona Heights for the hospital. I got my tonsils out at Tarentum when I was about 4. I can still smell the ether. And we went down there for eyeglasses. And then later it was Vandergrift, and later then it was Indiana. But we were more geared. My dad had to go to the bank in Pittsburgh, and also for the banking things. He didn't come up to Indiana for that. It was Pittsburgh that he had to go to for things as far as banking, whatever he had to do. And we went to Pittsburgh. That was a treat to go a few times a year to get to go into Pittsburgh and shop. We loved that. And then when you did buy anything, the trucks from Horns and Kaufman's and those stores would come to it, Little Avonmore. They would deliver, which was wonderful. And of course, I'm jumping around here for you. I also remember us getting the milk on the porch from the time I was little, because we got it from the farmer and it was not pasteurized yet. And we also had an ice box, and I can remember them coming with the big blocks of ice to put in it. And then my family got a regular refrigerator, so then that, I just vaguely remember that little bit. And but we had to go to the post office for mail. It was not delivered. And I don't think it still is for them. And we had very few. We had 2 little grocery stores in town. And we had a movie theater. And it seemed to get a lot of the latest movies. And then Salzburg would get some of the ones that we didn't. And movies were very cheap. And my dad went a lot, and we got to go a lot. And we loved that. And and then of course during the war, then you'd see the awful news releases about the conflicts that were going on overseas and things. One thing that's very vivid for me, every Armistice Day, or Veterans Day now that we call it, my grandmother would hang up a gold star and for her son who was killed. He was a dentist. He had gone to Pitt, and he kept trying to go, and they kept turning him down. I never did know why, unless it was because he wore glasses. And he insisted on going in, and he died at Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia of the flu. He got that terrible flu in 1918. My grandfather and grandmother went down and nursed him. Of course, I wasn't living then. I only learned all of that later. And but he still died. And so he's buried. We have a cemetery in Avonmore called Westview. It's a very nice, if a cemetery could be nice, it's a very nice cemetery. And he has a big stone marker there.
Actually, now that you mentioned, I think I always have to visit that one.
Yes.
That's close by.
Yes.
But I think I've noticed that before, because I've never heard the last name Couch before.
Yes. Well, this one is Ficus, and it's a big
Ficus?
square that when you first go in, you
Yeah.
can see it. Yeah. And then couches down, the small ones are around it. Yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting.
You'll have to look next time you're home.
Yeah. Okay, so talking more about starting college, was there any indication in your family that there was a struggle to put you through college at all?
No, I was always taught that I would be going, and so would my sister. She went to PCW. She went to Pennsylvania College for Women in Pittsburgh. She was 5.5 years older than me. And so she was sent there, and they were careful with money, but we did not splurge. You know, I mean, you did not waste your money. And And in fact, they didn't think that I should try out for a scholarship. They felt that should be for people who were maybe not going to get the chance to go. And so I didn't have to try out for anything. But I came up here in my high school years for voice, and for Dr. Chayette for violin, and Mr. Hughes for piano, and Mrs. Marlin for voice, before I ever started the college. But I didn't feel, the veterans came then when I got here in 47, and some of them were writing music, and they were played in bands, and I just did not feel I was as qualified as I could have been. I probably would have been fine teaching elementary. I did a lot of music when I taught elementary, but you know what I mean. I just didn't. I got out of it then and went into elementary. But I still played in music club here in a violin workshop for years, and of course still played the piano, and at school or at church whenever I subbed or things. So.
So what was your major? Did you go for secondary education?
No,
then?
it was elementary.
Oh, so
that was the
elementary.
elementary, yes.
Sure. And was it like general elementary, or did you have?
It was just
specific...
we didn't have much choice, honey. Then, in fact, I wanted history because I liked history. They said, "Oh no, there's too many history majors at that time." Everybody had a minor in history. I know my husband did. He was in art. And he had a minor in history and a minor in something else. But I just went into elementary. And then I taught for 3 years. Then he was asked to come to Indiana to teach. And then I subbed after that. I had my family. And then later I started to sub. Mm-hmm. And I was about the longest living sub that they had. I was still subbing into my 80s. So then I finally retired.
So where did you start teaching? I think
it was at Winel's Crossroad, which that building is gone. I believe that was connected to Vandergrift school system. Then my husband taught for Apollo, and I tried out for a job, first grade, at Spring Church, and I taught there 2 years then, and that made my permanent certificate, and then we moved to Indiana after that.
And you did just subbing at Indiana?
Yes, and then later, especially the last 20 years after Ted died, I did a lot of subbing. And I did all elementary. I did a lot in Aaron before that, before he died. I was asked to go to Aaron, and I worked with the handicapped children. Then they dispersed them into the schools, and I didn't do quite as much after that. But I did do some high school with the learning and handicapped and learning disability. And I still have people who remember me from that, even though I didn't do it all that much. But I loved that, and I enjoyed the children very much.
So you said you went to IUP in 1947?
Yes, and I graduated in 1951. And I had the same college roommate the whole way through. I joined a sorority, Delta Sigma Epsilon, which I believe is now Delta Zeta or something. We only had 3 sororities, and no wait, there were more than that. 3 fraternities, and I think it became about 6 sororities, maybe. But it was just, it was fun. I still have friends from that, except a lot of them have passed away now. But we stayed friends. A lot of us ended up here in Indiana afterwards, so that was nice. Yeah.
So during IUP, or what was it called at the time?
Indiana State Teachers College. And then about my junior year, they called it Indiana State College. And it was not a university until after, I think in the 60s, I believe. Anyway, that's what it was.
So during this time, I know I've read a lot about how there's a lot of gendered policies, like, I'm not sure if you experienced them.
Heavens no.
Yeah, I know I did research and it was like they couldn't walk on this like the same like stairwell like boys and girls or something like that.
Well, I don't remember that at all, but I know we had to be in by 10. We were not allowed to ride in cars. We were not to wear blue jeans. Blue jeans were not popular then the way they are now.
Yeah.
Well, they could actually be slacks too, I guess you could call them. We had great restrictions as far as the girls. I don't remember anything about staircases. Come to think of it, though, outside the dining hall, yes, I think maybe that there was a split there, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I don't remember that much about it. Apparently, it did not affect me very much. We had to go to convocation every once a week. I don't think they make them do anything like that now. And you were afraid to miss class, you just... It was much stricter, and we expected it, and I'm glad it was. Mm-hmm. And you didn't want boys on your floor. We ran around to the bathroom and washed our hair and put it up in those funny curlers, which they don't do now. And you know what I mean? It was a different world. It was a wonderful, it was sort of a wonderful world, really.
So in general, you would just say the rules were just more stricter in general?
Yes, I guess so. Mm-hmm. And then when the veterans came back, one of the, Miss Kimball, who was the Dean of Women, warned the girls about these nasty veterans. We were not to date them. But of course, a lot of them were older. Well, of course, almost all of us ended up marrying them later on, And, yes, but we thought nothing of it because we had been restricted at home. You just listened. Mm-hmm. And if there was anything much went on, there was no drinking problem. I suppose there were some that did it, but you didn't. And even the boys, they maybe have their own little group with beer, but I meant there was not a lot of fraternizing the way there is now, I think.
Okay, so let's go back to dorm life.
Oh.
So you said that it was all women on like the same...
Oh, yeah, but yes, the whole building in John Sutton was all women. And we were on the 4th floor. My mother was worried to death because she thought it was a fire trap. And Velma and I were always changing our furniture around and making it livable. And we just had a wonderful time. And getting to know each other and getting to know people and going to classes. And we knew our teachers and we liked them. And at that time, I think I knew every teacher's name on campus. And it just was a nice, safe world.
I read somewhere that during like the 40s, the campus was going through a lot of like building, like they were adding more buildings and stuff. Do you know if that affected at all?
No, I don't remember it at all.
Because I know now it's like constant construction and stuff. And they keep adding to it.
We had Clark House that we went to our 3rd year and 4th year. And they added... Thomas Sutton was on John Sutton, and that's where we ate our meals. Later, they tore that down, but I believe that was after we were gone. And I don't really remember too much about any actual buildings. After we were out, about 1952, I think, I believe Leonard burned down. It was not Leonard that burned, and that was a shock. Of course, we went to a lot of classes there. The art and the home ec were in the same building, and of course that's changed now. We did our student teaching. They were crossed with Indiana schools at the time I did my student teaching. There were 5 student teachers at the lab school. It was too much. And I think we would have been better off to have been in the town schools and gotten a better idea of a regular classroom.
Yeah.
That was difficult. And now my roommate was sent out of town, and so was Ted, my husband. But a lot of them, of course, went away, but the elementaries weren't sent out. And I really don't remember that much about building. Maybe they did, and it didn't disrupt, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't disrupt campus.
It does now.
Yeah, oh, it does, you know.
No, it must. I think it was whoever the president at the time. I think it was Pratt. Was his last name?
Yes, he was good.
Yeah, I think the article I read, it was like for the next his 20-year.
Well, yes,
He
then
had a lot of-
they added to it.
Yeah, so I guess it's just like for that time, because
Yeah.
now it's like we have so many buildings
Oh,
at the same
yeah.
time
Oh,
they're doing
my.
it. Yeah.
Well, and they wanted to do away with the Oak campus, so we had a fit. And I was on with the ones that tried to save John Sutton. We didn't want to tear that down, and we managed. And that's when I think they took off Thomas and changed part of the building. And but I felt bad for a young lady told me when she came back a couple of years ago that it wasn't her college. It was so changed that she didn't recognize anything, and that's too bad. For us, we still have John Sutton, and we still have the Oak Grove. And of course, we've had the gym, the Waller, and we didn't have the library there. See, I'm a little vague about the library. Isn't that funny?
Okay, so let's see. So did you notice any difference, like whenever you would visit Indiana as a kid, did you notice the campus growing from a kid to when you attended?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it expanded, and there were houses. Something that occurred that might be of interest to you. 2 Negro girls came and were in our 1947 class. Doris Roberts and, oh dear, wouldn't you know her names? Whatever the hell. They were both in music. Anyway, that was a first. And they were not allowed, they would not be served at the Capitol Restaurant. And everybody loved to go there for their roles. And that was a shame. And they came back to our 50th and they told about how that had happened to them. We were not, because we were Northerners, I had 2 Negro boys in my class. We thought nothing of it, you know what I mean? And as I don't remember the fellas, they were on sport teams with the boys, and we've talked about this with Lewis, and they didn't make any, you know, nobody seemed to make any difference about it. They were just there. We didn't have any of this awful things that they go through now. And of course, we didn't have the computers or anything, the internet, to say nasty things about people. And I suppose some schools there was a lot of that, but there wasn't with us. But we were a very small school, a very small town. And we had only 1 Jewish family. But of course, we had many Polish families, Italian families, and the rest of us, so we're just whatever we are, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was the makeup of the town. So then when we came to school, I don't know as we really thought anything of the 2 girls being there, except that we knew this was a big deal because it was the first they had allowed them to come. And so that was really a feather in Indiana's cap, the college's cap, that they would started and let those young people come. And they graduated and went on to teach music. They did very, you know, beautifully. Dolores Adams was the name of the one girl, a beautiful singing voice. And the other girl I mentioned, I forgot The other one, Doris Roberts, I've forgotten. But they both were alive for our 50th, and they came, and I couldn't tell you now. So many of them have passed on. I don't know if they have or not, but...
No, yeah, that's very interesting, because whenever you look at Indiana's history, I know, what was it, the swimming pool or something?
Oh, yes,
It
yes.
didn't desegregate until
Oh, yes, it was
later.
segregated. When my boys were still little, I took them there for swimming lessons. And then after that, they made a big deal. And they tried to make a big deal of a family that came into, that was a mixed family, biracial, into Horace Mann. And I remember Mrs. Hellman, who was head of the Historical Society, who founded it, they were her neighbors for a while. And it was no big deal to her. They were just neighbors. And then they moved on up to School Street, and I think there was something said, you know, and they joined the, Indiana too did not have, I don't know, is there any other black children at the time my boys were in, but these were biracial. These were white mother and a black father. So that was sort of a big deal. And then, of course, through the years, it's all changed. My husband was adopted by Seneca Indians as a teacher. He was an art teacher. And he was allowed to, they made him an outfit, and then eventually me. But we were allowed to do programs, and at that time, we brought Sally and Ernie Grove, Seneca Indians, to speak at Indiana. Well, the young people were just thrilled that they were Indians. The Indians are coming. The Indians are coming. And of course now they're Native Americans. You don't call, but the Indians didn't mind being called Indians. They called themselves Indians. And I think they thought a lot of the stuff that people go through is silly. And but anyway, this was such a big deal. Now these students would think nothing of having them come and speak because they're so used to children from all over the world coming and going to our schools, you know, from the different. But at that time period, in the 50s and 60s, well, this was actually the 60s, this was a big deal. And my boys have friends that still remember vividly, you know, we're still fascinated by the fact that Ted had all this Indian lore and all these things. And I still have some of it, of course. But
So looking at the 50s, 60s, and 70s,
Yes.
there's a lot of social change going
oh,
on.
yes.
So other than what you've just described, did you see any other changes within the town of Indiana itself happening
I
socially?
think people could move around more into housing that hadn't before. I think there was some of that. And being teachers, we were not, my husband was not prejudiced, you know. I mean, we were not, I was not aware of it. Maybe other people would be able to say that they were, but I certainly wasn't. We just accepted people the way they were, and our Indian friends came to visit us. If the neighbors thought it was strange, I don't think so. I think they just accepted it and were fascinated too that they would come and stop at our house and come and visit. And they went and danced at the Rustic Lodge, this group of Indians from Salamanca, the Senecas, and they danced to Fort Ligonier. And in fact, they did something Sally and Ernie did that Ted and I certainly never did. They danced for the President of the United States. And Senator Udall from Utah got all the Indians together one year. I wish I could remember the year this happened. Probably in the 70s or 80s maybe. But they congregated in Washington, D.C., and they had all the Indians from the different tribes come, and they danced. Sally and Ernie danced for the president. And I think that was unique in our lives. And our boys loved going up there to visit and getting to sleep in a true Indian house before they put the dam in, and Sally and Ernie had to go into a little ordinary ranch house that was all electric, and they hated it.
No, it's interesting hearing the stories about the Native Americans, because I know there's a lot of animosity towards the name for like the Indiana Indians, like the mascots and stuff. I've seen a lot of protests for that.
I think it's ridiculous. And our own Indian friends thought it was silly. And I thought it was terrible when they took away the Indians. I did not care for that hawk. I think it's ugly. I think they could have had a more noble bird. But so be it. There's nothing we could do. You know, we protested. And a lot of the alumni wouldn't give money after that. And now they're starting in on our school, which Indiana was here because the Indians were here. It is not saying anything bad about them. It's just a fact of life. It's like a river that is there. And so you don't move the river because you think it doesn't fit or something. I don't know. I think it's ridiculous.
Okay, so going back to the social change thing, were you politically active during the time, or?
No, I voted but I never joined really a party or anything.
Okay.
I think we just were too busy living and surviving. I had 3 boys, and it just, we didn't worry too much about that. Some families do, of course, but.
So you had 3 boys. What were their names?
Jeffrey, he is a social worker in Florida. He went to Clarion University. And he worked in New York City for 11 years with Nielsen Rating. And had to work with the first computers, great big things. And that was sort of fun. And he did a lot with plays and met a lot of people that were starting out in the movies and theater and things. And so he had an interesting background there. And he's in Florida. And then I have a middle son who lives in Shalocta, Edwin Allen, and he's called Jed. And then Tom, the youngest one, worked at IUP, and he just retired. And by the time I had the 3rd son, both grandfathers said, if you're not going to have a girl, I think a grandfather's name would be fine. So he became Thomas Hale.
Okay, so you said that your husband also was a teacher?
Yes, he was an art teacher. And he was teaching in Apollo, and 2 men came from Indiana schools and asked him to come up and teach at Indiana. And he did, and they don't do that anymore either.
So you raised your family in Indiana?
Yes. And we moved up here and lived in an apartment until we bought a house and had the boys, yes.
Did you ever have, forgive me if it's a little too personal, but were there any economic burdens when you were raising your family at all?
We had to be careful because Ted did not make, yes, as a teacher, he wasn't making any big bucks or anything. And so we tried to be very careful with our money. And we were conservative, I guess you'd say, you know.
So did you notice if there was much of a change from your own childhood compared to when you were raising your children? Was it about the same?
My parents were very restrictive. I don't think I was as good a disciplinarian. And our boys, well, no, in a sense they got to go play. They could take the dog and go, the whole neighborhood, go up on run up on the hill where the reservoir was, and they'd run through the woods with the dogs, and they could go all over the neighborhood and in and out of each other's houses. It's a very normal, and they're so happy that they had that normal childhood. And they were talking not long ago with another businessman up street that was raised in our neighborhood, and he had the same thing. But the children now, they don't seem to know, they can't seem to go out and play the way we did. We'd go and build dams in the creek at home, and my kids did that. And they got dirty, and they it was just a nice, and they weren't sent to, we didn't send them to, I was at home. We didn't send them to preschool. There was none of that business. Mothers were at home. We were all home in the neighborhood and took care of our children, and that was wonderful. I'm getting a cramp in my leg. I do this, and so that was nice. And so that part was the same for it. And they did sled riding, and they rode bikes, just normal. I did see that they got swimming lessons. I did see that I didn't have that. I got to go swimming because the neighbors took me to our friends, but we had nothing like that, and Avamore didn't have a pool. But it was, they were a little more structured that way. And when my first child, when Jeffrey started school, the churches had them come on Wednesday morning, and then after a while they quit that. They didn't have that with the churches anymore. But we did do that. That was something different that they don't do now. And we didn't have homeschooling. People went to you either went to the Catholic school or you went to the town schools. And so
whenever you were raising your children, when did you start getting back into the workforce? I
think when the youngest one was 5 or 6, and I subbed for Mrs. Moats in kindergarten for 2 months, and I loved it. And but my oldest son one time, years later, said to me, "I'd have just died if you hadn't been home when I got home from school." And I don't think sometimes mothers realize how important. But I will say this, I do think they're more independent, the students now, when mother is working, But not everybody has that choice, and they can't do that. But somehow, we didn't expect the earth. We didn't expect to have everything. So you just did without, I guess. And yet we certainly never lacked for food or clothing or, we just lived normal lives. And I guess nobody spent a fantastic amount on things. You just didn't waste it, I guess.
Okay, so we're going to get into some of our larger questions now, just looking at Indiana.
All right.
What would you say are some of the biggest changes from visiting as a child to now?
All the food places, all the businesses outside town, all the housing developments. You wonder where all these people are. The town has expanded. And you have all these little suburbs and things, if you want to call them that. I guess they don't really. It's just a lot more traffic, a lot more people. And of course now with so many students coming in, you see the college, there were 400 people or 495 in my freshman class. They told us half of us would drop out before the second year, and they did. And so, see, the college was much, much smaller, and it has just steadily grown through the years. Now I understand they are not having quite as many students as they did, but it is just the whole physical plant. The basic part of town, the churches, and the restaurants, some of them are still here. Rustic Lodge is still here. Bruno's is still here. Some of those basic things are still with us, and some of the stores. But when the mall came, that was when there was a big difference. Some of our friends were warned that were businessmen uptown that if they didn't go to the mall, they would lose their business. And so one of them that I know of simply retired. He said, "I'm not going to the mall. I'm not doing that." And that changed our way of life, and people sort of left the downtown to go out and park at the mall because you could park for free, and you had a place to park, and you could go. And now we're changing again because of the main stores leaving, and now our mall is sort of dying at the moment. I don't know. It may come back. And we had so many businesses. There was Cintron, places for people to work, Fisher's. When Ted was in college, they had the leather factory, King's, and he and Blair drew ads. They earned money by drawing ads for the leather company for their catalog. And we had Steiner's up street that was there for many, many years. And Handy Andy's then came in. I used to stop there when I took the boys to junior high. I'd stop at, when I came back, then I'd do my grocery shopping before I went home. And it's just, now it's more lawyers and a lot of things like that. Well, we have food up street too. And a lot of those restaurants have been there for a while, but they weren't there when my kids were little, you know. The candy place left, and just, you know, different ones, of course, that have gone on. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy Stewart Museum, Stewart Hardware was there, and I saw, as a child, I remember getting to see the Oscar or whatever. Maybe I wasn't that small when he got it, but I remember seeing that, and I remember as a child seeing that hardware and met Jimmy Stewart along the line. And so it's, you know, and the railroad station went, and the train wasn't through town anymore. And my husband recalled getting to move the train on the track when the 5th grade went up and got to see the train. And of course, that's long gone. Mm-hmm. And of course, the college kept expanding, and, you know, so things. Mm-hmm.
So it's to my understanding that Indiana had an Uptown area, which is probably, I'm assuming, Philadelphia Street.
Yes.
Is that what you guys called it back in the day? Uptown? Or?
Yes. Well, that we'd say we're going downtown. Some people said uptown, some people said downtown. I think it depended on where you lived, you know, from where you lived. But they had Murphy's and McCrory's, and Saturday nights and Friday nights the country people would come in, and everybody was up the street, and the stores were open, and people could get a bite to eat in at Murphy's if you wanted. I don't think the other one had a food court that was on the corner, and Brody's, and of course we just loved it. Troutman's and Sears and Montgomery Ward, all of them were up there, and it was wonderful. And then because the mall came, things changed entirely. And I'm not sure when Zabias started that. Was that in the 70s or 80s? Do you know?
The what?
When Mr. Zabias from Johnstown started the mall. I've lost track of when that all changed.
I will have to look into that.
I would have to look it up too. It's been a long time.
It seems like the mall had a pretty huge impact on the town's business.
It did. Mm-hmm. Oh my, yes.
So talking about impacts, how do you think the university impacts the community today?
Today?
Mm-hmm.
Quite a bit, I think. And now some of them are getting on town council. And of course, they're the biggest thing, I think, for the town is this controlling of the drinking at St. Patrick's and at homecoming. See, we had none of that when I was in school. You just did not see that, and you wouldn't have thought of doing it. And I believe it went along like that for years. I don't really know. I think some of this started when they started letting girls and boys be in the same dorms and stuff. And now I may be wrong, but all of a sudden it's just gotten out of hand. And we, as young ladies, wouldn't have been caught dead in a bar. You did not go to bars and meet people. Now everybody does it and they don't think anything of it. Even the adults, I mean, you know. And of course, I don't know. That I think is the worst impact for the town. Mm-hmm. Other than that, a lot of the students are wonderful, and they help do a lot of things in the different churches and the different facets of helping the young people, And of course, there's always that side too. There are
Yeah.
wonderful ones whom we are glad to have, in the community, and we can't forget them. But it is too bad we still have. I think the drinking has caused problems for us.
So you were listing some organizations just within like a community. I know. Are you involved in any other organizations besides the Historical Society?
Yeah. I belong to Evergreen Garden Club, that is an afternoon garden club group. I've been president a couple of times. I just finished being at my ancient age, and then I was Historical Society president before, and am again. Now I'm finishing up, and this is it. I'm not. That's it. And we have an Indiana Garden Club that has been here for years, meets at night. I wasn't in it. We had a wonderful music club that I belonged to for 25 years, and it was slowly dying, and I got out of it then after a while. And we belonged to a camping group. There were a couple of camping groups. We were the Pineys, and we were quite active in presidents, and that took our turn a couple of times. And Lioness Auxiliary, I was president there a couple of times. Everybody took their turn. But then when women were allowed to be in Lions Club, that changed things. And so the auxiliary was out the door. And now there are only a couple of us left. And there's all kinds of bridge clubs. I belong to a couple of bridge clubs. I belong to only one now. They went defunct then for a while, and I started playing again a little bit. But the young people don't play. They have a hard time getting people to play. And we have our Rotary, of course, and our Kiwanis, and they have, of course, their women are in with them doing things. And we have a lot of organizations that do good for the town, but they, like all of them, are having a harder time with older members. And we don't do as much as we did and aren't as large groups as we were. And there's all kinds of groups, of course, with the different churches that I don't know about. I was quite active in my church, and I'm still head of a bereavement committee. I just got off a couple of committees, but everybody does your part. The ones that are willing to do, I think they're just involved in all kinds of things. And the same with our board on the Historical Society. They're all into other organizations too and helping do things. And it's just the way we are, But our younger people are not as interested in coming in, most of them, to do things the way that we did. And it was just sort of a way of life. You serve, you take your turn.
It sounds like the organizations here are pretty integral.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. They're important. They have, of course, for the children, they have isn't it the Evergreen Girls and Boys or something? Those things, I really don't have anything to do with them. But you see, they're ongoing, trying to help in their way with children, and I think that's wonderful. And some of those things.
I've been jumping around with all my questions, so I'm trying to find if there's anything else I haven't asked you yet. Start from the top.
Well, do you realize how many rest homes we have in Indiana? See, that's something that has bloomed.
Restaurants?
Rest homes.
Oh, rest home.
Yes. We've got, well, some of them say they're therapy, some say different things, but there's St. Andrews. There's, has somebody else gone over those with you? There's Indian Haven, there's Rose Haven, there's Bethany Place. Those are the things I had written down for you. There's a new one, The Fountain. There's Maple Valley out in the county down by Shalocta. There's another one, Moorhead House. There's just all of those things have blossomed through the years because the population is aging and they need somewhere for these people to go. And they don't have what they call the poor fund. They don't have the Indiana County Home anymore to put people in who possibly have disabilities or couldn't pay. And all of that changed. And do you need some water, honey? I don't know whether there's any cups here or not, but I have water. Oh yeah, here's water. Here are cups.
Sorry.
Here you are, darling.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Megan, I just got over a cold, so I'm like...
Oh, I had some kind of weird virus, but I didn't have, it was just more stomach, and I know what you mean. It's that time of year.
Yep. Okay. I'm gonna have fun listening to my call.
Oh, that's all right.
Whew. Okay. I think I'm done coughing now.
I hope I've helped you.
Oh, this is a lot of... Yeah, this is great.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad.
Okay, so...
Well, I shouldn't get off the subject. My husband and I also did living history. And in 1976, they started a little group here of colonials. Well, then that went into a Mercer's Third. There was actually a Colonel Mercer around this area. And we had green coats. I was making clothing for this stuff. And then they asked him to be a sutler, and he carried leather and baskets and guns and all kinds of things for colonial living. But that group fell apart, and we had to go for insurance whatever you want to call it, to be covered. And so we ended up in a French group. So we've done that now since before he's been gone 21 years. We've been there in that 25 years or 30. And at Fort Ligonier is next weekend. And I still belong, and I try to go. The last couple of years I've only gone to Fort Ligonier. I haven't gotten to the other things. I'm not sure I'll make it this year or not. But it has been a wonderful thing to do, you know. And Fort Ligonier, of course, has changed through the years. And in fact, when Don Hallen started a history unit at Eisenhower years ago, he asked Ted to bring in a flintlock and muskets and things to show the children. And from that, they started portraying Civil War. And then they did it with Ben Franklin and Eisenhower, and some of the kids wore gray coats and some wore blue. And they did the whole thing, the food, the doctors, the games, everything was covered for that time period, which I think is a wonderful history lesson for students. And so that's just a sideline. We've had an interesting life.
No, yeah, I have a lot of questions here, but you answered everything.
Oh, did I? Good, okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to have a lot of great information here.
Oh, good, okay.
Just going to go through it one more time and make sure there's no stray ones. Oh, this one. Okay. So going back to college years.
Oh, yes,
quick.
Yes.
Was there a balance of men and women, or did you notice if there was more of one or the other?
I would assume there were more women, but see, the men were pouring in from World War II and signing up. So I I really don't know. I couldn't tell you. Looking at the yearbooks, I think it seemed fairly even. And of course, it got more even as a couple of those years went on. 46, there were not too many men. I wasn't here yet, but my husband was. And so 47, there were more kept coming. And what was interesting was, in one of the classes, a geography class, I believe it was Miss Zink, was telling about something, and one of the men spoke up and said, "I'm sorry, Dr. Zink, but we changed that." And they had changed some kind of a waterway at the boot of Italy, and anyway, it changed the course of something, and of course it was the same that she knew to teach, and she was grateful that he explained what they had done. It was fascinating. And see, they changed the world, those fellows. They came back with a whole different aspect. My husband was a radioman on a B-29, and that was very experimental at one time. They never knew when they went up in it what would fall off or what would happen.
Yeah.
And he flew from Guam over Japan for 35 missions, and his was one of the few airplanes, of 3 at that time, that did not have to abort. And one time at Eisenhower, a number of years ago, they asked me to tell about Ted's, what he did, and I did. And they seemed to enjoy the talk anyway. And I did get to help with the Horseman's 100th anniversary. And they asked me to talk. I wish Ted had been living because he taught there. I only subbed there. But I told about how he brought Sally and Ernie, the Indians, there. I was only allowed to talk for 3 minutes. And so I told them, because I thought that was a different facet, you know, that had happened in the school's history. But we had dances. They had an after-dinner dance after dinner that you go down to the Blue Room. And my sophomore year, my husband, Ted asked me why I didn't come down to the after-dinner dances. Well, I did, and that was it. So we went together 3 years and got married as soon as I graduated in 1951.
Did you know your husband at all before college?
Oh, no, I just met him. I knew him the freshman year because I had friends who were in the art department. And I knew him, but I did not know him before. He was a town boy, and he had come back from World War II, and he lived in town, but he belonged to the Sigtaws. But he, you know, that's how I got to know him. So.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share at all?
Oh, I think we've covered the waterfront pretty much.
Yes,
I hope I've helped you.
Oh, definitely.
And Avonmore is still a nice little community to live in. Of course, it's not maybe, and it too has blossomed out in houses in other parts of the community, and it's maybe not quite as pretty as it had been when it had a movie and it had, you know, all this stuff, but we don't have as much anymore. But from what I understand, they're not going to have any more reunions. They have a hard time there again. Bell Township is having a hard time getting people to run it. And I think, from what I understand, I don't think they're going to have any. I faithfully went. My oldest son came with me last year, I believe. We went to the my class 70th reunion. And I never thought I'd live to be to my 70th reunion of my high school class. Can you believe?
Okay.
So.
I'm gonna shut this off.
Yeah.